Today is January 15th, 2022. And today we will finally get back to the lectures on the 10 Oxherding pictures by Yamada Roshi, translated by Victor Sogan-Hori. To begin that, though, I'd like to read you one of Hakuin's letters. It's from this, it's, as you'll see, rather thick. It's a terrific book, great painting of Hakuin there. The complete Poison Blossoms from a Thicket of Thorn. Hakuin had a terrifically wry, poetic way of talking about things. These are the Zen records of Hakuin Zenji, translated by Norman Waddell. And I'd like to read you one of his letters as an introduction to the 10 Oxherding pictures. We're at actually the second Oxherding picture, or third, second, Seeing Traces of the Ox. And I think this is a great introductory to it, or introduction to it, as you'll see when we get to Yamada Roshi's comments. So this is Hakuin Zenji. This letter was probably written in 1742, or Hakuin looking back to a time and talking about it. In the autumn of the second year of Kampo, when I was at Ryotanji to conduct a large Dharma meeting, Mr. Matani invited me to one of these hermitages. There are several small, beautiful hermitages built by a lord of the time. Kondo Chikazumi of Inoya Castle in Totomi Province was the person. He's a military retainer a descendant of an important military retainer. And Hakuin describes him as a man of noble character. Anyway, he constructed two hermitages at sites of great scenic beauty. And so Hakuin says, when I was at Ryotanji to conduct a large Dharma meeting, Mr. Matani invited me to one of these hermitages. I was able to spend several days amid its beautiful natural surroundings. He told me my Lord did not build these hermitages because he hoped they would someday become large and splendid temples. His true purpose was simply to provide a place where people sincerely interested in Zen practice, even one person or two, could come and stay in order to concentrate on investigating the matter of their self. I responded to this with a sigh of admiration, saying, Lord Chikazumi is a truly wise man. With his inherent aptitude for pursuing the way of Zen, he may be the person with the deep aspiration needed to raise up the fortunes of our school. If this aspiration rouses a Zen stalwart to come here dragging a battered old cooking pot, and he hangs around chewing on nothing but vegetable stalks, and he proceeds to quietly and rigorously engage in hidden practice and thoroughly investigate the great matter, then you mustn't speak of this hermitage as if it were a crude hut made from a few handfuls of reeds. It would surpass by 1,000 million times any great monastery with its splendid golden halls. I well know that his vision is one that far transcends the ideas held by others who occupy similar positions. I have also heard that Lord Chikazumi's everyday behavior is straight and true, that he upholds the precepts, performs zazen, and recites sutras with rarely seen devotion and vigor. It is as rare as a lotus flowering amidst the flames. My only wish is that he take his practice just one step farther, or further, just one step further. Mr. Bhatani said, what would that be? Please tell me. In the Sutra of the Bequeathed Teaching, the Buddha, this is Hakuin now going on, answering, the Buddha enumerated 20 difficulties humans must overcome if they are to reach attainment. One of them is the difficulty for the wealthy and famous to develop an affinity for the way. Everyone is inherently capable of directly attaining the four Buddha wisdoms. Who is there that does not have a liking for the way? But to enter that way is extremely difficult. Unless a person enters the way and realizes the oneness of all things in him or herself, and it'll be all gender masculine pronouns. Hakuin was writing in the 1700s. Even though he takes only one meal each morning and spends his days and nights engaged in a life of rigorous practice, even though that becomes known to the heavenly gods, and they shower him with flowers and fill the air with the scent of marvelous incense, it is all meaningless. Nothing more than an indication that he is mired within birth and death on a grand scale. But there is a single word or phrase that can sever even the finest, most minute roots of delusion. It is like a fine sword of enormous length that stands leaning against the sky, always ready to destroy the old nest of illusion, or like an iron hammer of untold weight that will smash illusory thoughts to finest powder. A monk asked Zhao Chu, all things return to the one. Where does the one return to? Zhao Chu replied, when I was in Qingzhou, I made a cloth robe that weighed 7 pounds. These words can work with a marvelous effectiveness if you take them and apply yourself to them in your practice. If you bore into them when you are meditating and when you are engaged in daily activities, when you are walking, standing, sitting, or lying down, bore into them from the sides and from the front and from the rear, and continue boring into them until there is no place left to bore, no place to put either a hand or foot, nothing whatever you can apply thought or understanding to. At that time, if you keep pushing steadily forward without faltering, the time will come when everything suddenly falls away and Satori opens up. The joy you experience at that time will be something you have never known before. No beneficial act you could perform would produce a result of such magnitude. How could anyone who aspires to become a person of great stature think it worth his while to engage in any good or beneficent acts apart from this? Mr. Matani said, I would like you to write this down and give it to me as a parting gift before I leave for Edo. I did as he requested. So that's Hakuin in his inimitable style. Now let's take a look at Yamada Roshi, Yamada Mumen Roshi. This is his picture, by the way. He was a noted Zen teacher, contemporary. And these were lectures, if you remember, that he gave in, I think, 1954 to brand new monks in a session. So, preface to Seeing the Traces, which is picture number 2 of the 10 Oxherding pictures. With the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding. Through study of the teachings, you find traces. Yes, read. That's what he's saying. Read sutras, read Buddhist teachings. They're going to help you find an affinity with what this is all about. You see clearly and this was, Oxherding pictures, this was written in the 12th century. You see clearly the many vessels are all one metal, and the 10,000 things are all yourself. That's what the teachings will put in front of you. Many vessels are all one metal, and the 10,000 things are all yourself. There's a difference, of course, between saying this is my vase and this vase is myself. But if you do not distinguish correct from incorrect, how will you recognize true from false? Since you have yet to pass through that gate, only tentatively have you seen the traces. So we're still busy at this point thinking, me. But now and again, As we practice on, there are moments of real sense of oneness, of intimacy, of connection, of, oh, the light is so beautiful on the snow, or, oh, the way the bird moves across the sky. It's quite something. There are moments where we're really intimate and connected, of kind of a fundamental okayness. The verse, by the water and under the trees, tracks thick and fast. In other words, anywhere you go, the signs are all around you if you have the eyes to see. Nothing's been hidden, but we don't see it. But there are tracks all around, traces by the water and under the trees, tracks thick and fast. In the sweet grasses, thick with growth, did you see it or did you not? In the thick grasses, thick with growth, that is right in the midst of thoughts, desires, anxieties, problems, issues, all the things that we so busy our minds with, right there, right in the midst of it. Did you see it? The ox, right in the midst. Or did you not? But even in the depths of the deepest mountains, how could it hide from others its snout turned toward the sky or to the sky? Even in the depths of the deepest mountains, how could it hide from others? Its snout turned to the sky. Where could it hide? Remember, these are Oxherding pictures. You're seeking the ox, and now you've seen traces, you've seen tracks. You haven't yet seen the ox, but you're seeing traces, you're seeing tracks. And yet the ox itself, where could it hide? Where do you think it's hidden? In the depths of the mountains, or in the, is even when you're lost, surrounded by mountains of thought, mountains of feeling that seem to wall you in, make you feel isolated and alone. Right there. It's still right there. Can you see it? How could it hide? And yet, how often in our lives we seem to feel isolated and alone, as if it's all hidden. We're so buried under the mountains of our thought and emotion. It doesn't mean we get rid of these things. It means right there, right in the midst. How do you see it? This is where practice really begins to work, not by pushing things aside or pushing them away, but right there, to see it. Waka, which is the final verse essentially for each of the Oxherding pictures. Determination deep in the mountains, your efforts bear fruit. Tracks, how gratifying to see a sign. Determination deep in the mountains, your efforts bear fruit. Tracks, how satisfying to see a sign. You keep working at it and working at it and working at it, and now you see tracks. This is very encouraging. One moment and suddenly you really know why you're practicing, despite the difficulties, and then it's gone. But as Hakuin says, if you keep going, if you keep pushing into it, if you uphold, if you're working on a koan, if you probe into that question of the koan, standing, sitting, working, lying down, of course, not while driving a car or cutting vegetables with a sharp knife, but at all other times, you keep right at it, digging into it, everything will fall away and you will experience a joy like no other. The person who created the monk who created the Oxherding pictures is saying that same thing in the 12th century here. How gratifying to see a sign. Indeed, indeed. And it says determination. That's how you really carry on. Perseverance. Uh, and the good news is that as we continue on, we develop perseverance, we develop determination, we develop compassion, we develop courage by keeping at it, by trying again and again, by not giving up. Now, Yamada Roshi's teisho. The second picture is seeing the traces. This is the stage where, after searching for the ox deep in the mountains, you finally come across the tracks. And the preface goes, with the aid of the sutras, which is what we read before, you gain understanding. Through study of the teachings, you find traces. So Yamada Roshi says, first we must study the sutras and ponder the records left by the teachers of the past in order to determine where our own nature is. Yeah, it's important to read. Sometimes you hear it said that Zen monks do not have to read books or to study. When did this misleading idea get started? It's ridiculous to think that this could possibly be true. We say Zen is a separate transmission outside the scriptures, but it is only so because there's a teaching that there is something transmitted separate from it. If there were no teaching necessary in the first place, you could not speak of a transmission separate from it. If we do not first study the sutras and ponder the records, the sutras are the recorded sayings of the Buddha. So they go back 2,500 years or so. If we do not first study the sutras and ponder the records of the ancients, that would be through China, through Japan as well, what people wrote who experienced very deeply what this is all about. And the teachings they presented, this all helps us to see the traces, is what he's saying. If we don't do that, we'll end up going off in the wrong direction altogether. The ancient teachers engaged in all branches of scholarship and studied all there was to study, but just through scholarship alone, they were not able to settle what was bothering them. What was bothering them? What was bothering them is, why was I born? Why must I die? Why is there aging and sickness? Why is there injustice and misfortune? Why do animals suffer? What's bothering them is what's bothering us. They did this because they were bothered, not because everything was okay and they were calm. They did it because they were terrified or infuriated with all the issues that are in front of us now. Human beings have faced these questions for a very long time. It's how we become more fully, truly human beings, by facing our deepest questions, our deepest concerns, the things that really bother us. Thoreau spoke about not reading the times, reading the eternities. Well, these are part of our eternities as human beings. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why do difficult and painful things happen? Why is there injustice? Why is there poverty and hunger? All these issues. Anyway, if they, just through scholarship alone, they found they were not able to settle what was bothering them. That is, really get to the bottom of it. It was then that they turned to Zen. After having explored, after having thought, after having read, they realized that that alone wasn't going to do it. And that's when they turned to actual practice. That's when their Zen began. That is why their Zen has real power and dynamism. If you have no understanding of Buddhism, no knowledge of the words of the Dharma, it does not matter how many years you sit, your Zazen will be futile. So, in other words, he's emphasizing that, and this again is Yamada Roshi in 1954 or so, that a realization is the point, really settling our concerns, not just sitting calmly, not just, kind of getting to feel kind of stable and okay. Those are great. Don't get me wrong. They're important. But there is an aspiration that we all have to truly know and how to truly live and act wisely. And that's what he's making the point. That's what the Oxherding pictures are pointing to. That's what our practice is really about. He goes on, with the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding. The Zen sect does not base itself on any one sutra, but considers all sutras in the Buddhist canon equally worthy. It is worthwhile reading any sutra which Shakyamuni Buddha expounded, but within those, it is good to read the ones especially pointed out by our ancient teachers. And so he mentions Bodhidharma passed the Lankavatara Sutra onto the second patriarch, Ekadaishi, Weike in Chinese, with the advice that he would not be making a mistake if he took this text as a guide to practice. Both the fifth patriarch and the sixth patriarch attained their Zen through the Diamond Sutra. Linchi Rinzai came to Zen after thoroughly studying the Avatamsaka Flower Garland Sutra. Hakuin writes in his autobiography that he read the Lotus Sutra when he was young, but threw it away, laughing. If this is the king of all sutras, and even popular novels or storybooks or puppet plays can be the king of all sutras. Years later, when he had taken over a temple, he reread the Lotus Sutra. Reading the sutra till late one night, he heard the crick, crick of a cricket from under the floorboards and was suddenly enlightened to it as the wonderful embodiment of the lotus. He cried out in a great voice, "This wonderful sutra, how could I have been so prejudiced till now and rejected it out of hand?" In the Lotus Sutra, it is written, daily duties and attending to work is nothing other than true reality. Daily duties and attending to work is nothing other than true reality. When we do business or farm or do temple work or engage in politics and economics, all this is the Buddha Dharma. Again, it is written, all things now in the three worlds are my possessions. All sentient beings within them are my children. Again, when we say possessions, there's quite a difference between saying this is my car and this car is myself. Or this is my child, and this child is myself. This is my tree, or this tree is myself. So when he says possessions, be careful about what that means. All things now in the three worlds, the world of form, what is that? Desire, form, and formlessness, the three worlds. Also past, present, future, the three worlds. All things in the three worlds are my possession. All sentient beings within them, within those three worlds, are my children. To grow in comprehension of these words is what is meant by, with the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding. Roshi Kapleau used to say, the ancient teachings illumine the mind, and the mind illumines the ancient teachings. So, again, with the teisho, we just attend in our practice to the teisho. There's no note-taking or anything like that. That's how things become ourselves, become present. So right here, right now, the ancient teachings illumine the mind, and the mind illumines the ancient teachings. With the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding. In the Avatamsaka Flower Garland Sutra, it's written, the grass and trees, the land and the earth are all Buddha. What does that mean? How does that illumine the mind? How will your mind illumine this ancient teaching? There's an excitement to the edge of thinking, just even thinking about these words. What are they getting at? What does this mean? The grass and trees, the land and the earth are all Buddha? That's touching something. How do we experience that for real? It's like it gets us to the very edge of a precipice. With one more step, we could go right over and really experience what that means. So the teachings, the sutras can bring us right up to a point, but then we have to actualize those teachings ourselves. How? By probing into them, by allowing the mind to be illumined by them, and by illuminating them with our minds, with our attention, with our care, with not just seeing them, oh, that's a bunch of words, but really allowing them to transform us and to create doubt. I'm bothered by these words. I don't know what it means. I have to find out. In the Nirvana Sutra is written, all sentient beings whatsoever, or all sentient beings whatever, possess Buddha nature. A monk long ago was so bothered by this, he went to Zhao Chu, the great teacher, who had his first deep enlightenment at 19, did not begin teaching until he was 80 and lived to 120. A remarkable teacher in the Tonga 1,000 years ago. He must have read this. In the Nirvana Sutra is written, all sentient beings, whatever, possess Buddha nature. And he went to Zhao Chu and asked, does even a dog have Buddha nature? Because back then, dogs were extremely foul and lowly creatures. They weren't house pets. They were what guarded your yard or protected your flock or kept away intruders. And they were chained up outside and thrown pieces of meat now and then. Does even a dog have Buddha nature? Zhao Chu answered, Mu. That's the koan that most of us begin with. We also find, as Aiken Roshi said, you never really pass Mu. You can be passed on the koan, but you'll become more and more intimate with it your whole life. It springs from the Nirvana Sutras, saying, all sentient beings, whatever, possess Buddha nature. But that also means you. It means me. Well, where's my Buddha nature? What does that mean? How can I be Buddha? I know all my problems. I know all my issues. I know all my faults. I know my shortcomings. How can I be Buddha? How can that person I despise be Buddha? How can a dog, which is rolling in cow shit, be a Buddha? What does this mean? That monk was really bothered by it. Does even a dog have Buddha nature? In the Diamond Sutra is written, rouse the mind which resides nowhere. Doesn't my mind live inside my skull? That's what I thought. Wait, maybe I'm wrong. In fact, modern science is kind of getting to say, well, the mind isn't in the head. Never found anything in the brain called me. When we do surgery on the brain, I don't find the pictures of my mother's kitchen. Where is my mind anyway? And who hears right now these words? Who's doing the hearing? Where am I anyway? Well, the Buddha spoke about this 2,500 years ago. Rouse the mind which resides nowhere. What does that mean? How can my mind reside nowhere? I'm in here, aren't I? Well, what if that bothers me? What's this getting at? That's what koan practice is really about, being bothered so much that you want a real solution, that you know, not words in a book. You've already read the words in the book. You've studied the sutras. You've read teachings. They haven't solved your problem. How to live, how to age, how to die, how to deal with injustice and sorrow and grief and loss. They've been stopgaps. We hold to wonderful sayings. We hold to all kinds of things that have helped us. But in the end, they too deconstruct. All thoughts deconstruct. All things we can cling to deconstruct in the end. How do we really live this? Reading the sutras, studying teachings, even it doesn't just mean Buddhist teaching. Science is important. Politics is all of it. Raises our great question is how to be a full human being. And yet under there is the big question. Why was I born? Why must I die? Why is there suffering and injustice? If everything's Buddha, tell me that. If grasses and trees are Buddha, if the foulest dog is Buddha, then how come? How can that be? If terrible things happen, how can everything be Buddha? What's he saying here? What's this getting at? How do I know it? How do I understand it for myself? Practice begins with these difficult questions. It doesn't evade them and say, well, now you should be calm. It helps you focus the energy of a really human beingness growing up in a difficult world and culture and time. And it looks like it's been like that for a long time. We wouldn't have had these teachings from 2,500 years ago. We're all maturing. We're all growing up as we struggle with the issues of our time and so on. Anyway, all of these are none other than the immaculate embodiment of Zen, all express the Buddha mind just as it is. Another sutra I'll mention, which is a really entertaining sutra, and I hope one day you will sit down. We did commentaries on the entire Vimalakirti Sutra a few years ago, and I know Yamada Roshi just finished her year-long kind of commentary on the, almost a year-long, I guess, commentary on the Vimalakirti Sutra. Vimalakirti was a wealthy layman at the time of the Buddha, said to be equal in understanding to the Buddha, but he was engaged with life. He had family, he had businesses, he would get involved in the social issues of his time. He was known as a really mature, skillful human being. And he's lying on his sickbed, and the Buddha wants to send some of the great bodhisattvas and monks and nuns and such to question him about how he's doing. They all beg off because at some point in the past, the layman, Vimalakirti, it means spotless reputation, had already bested them in some kind of Dharma exchange. And so they're all a little anxious about being asked to go visit the sick man. And finally, the only one who gets forced into it is Manjushri. After all, he's the bodhisattva of wisdom. He's got to go. So the Buddha sends him off, and then a crowd goes with him, and they go to engage with Vimalakirti lying on his sickbed. And he says one of the great things of the total expression of non-duality. At one point, when Manjushri asks him, kind of, how's he doing? He says, well, I'm sick. Manjushri says, why are you sick? He says, I'm sick because all beings are sick with the sickness of duality, the sicknesses of greed, anger, and ignorance. When all beings are well, I'll be well too. If you've never, and some really funny things happen in the sutra, really funny things that poke real fun at the stuffiness of monastic Buddhism at the time. And it was one of the really favored sutras in ancient China, in Zen tradition. It's iconoclastic, and it's got some terrific humor about misogyny, really tearing that down, and all kinds of stuff anyway, if you've never read it, the Burton Watson translation from the Chinese is really tight and really good and modern, and the Robert Thurman from the translation from the Tibetan is a bit lengthier and a little more elaborate, but also excellent. If without studying the sutras, you merely sit in Zazen and get swell-headed because you've passed some koans, or even, heaven forbid, have had satori and received permission to teach, you'll become a Zen devil. With the aid of the sutras, you gain understanding, and through study of the teachings, you find traces. So it is written. Through the pointers left behind by the ancient teachers, we catch sight of the ox's traces. We catch sight of the footprints of the ox, called the heart-mind. The ox is a metaphor for our own nature, our own mind. We can't find our own mind. We see traces, but how do we grab hold of it and then eventually ride it home and then eventually forget it and then forget ourselves and enter, in the end, the marketplace with helping hands, re-enter the world with helping hands now. The ox is a metaphor for our own nature. Hard to grasp an ox, hard to take hold of an ox, hard to tame an ox. It's talking about our own mind. It's a brilliant metaphor. One of the great things about Zen is its terrible, amazing, wonderful creativity. And the Oxherding pictures really are just a great vision of that. You see clearly the many vessels are all one metal and the 10,000 things are all yourself. This is a true experience. This is intimacy. It's easy to mouth these words, but to really experience this clearly, not just faintly, is a lifetime's effort. And then to live from it is also a lifetime's effort. To express it in every word, in the way we interact with everyone and everything, is in a challenge that in traditional terms we're told is going to take us lifetimes. But we could begin now with this breath, this round of sitting, this thing that bothers us, this koan. It's an endless path of maturing is what we're on. In the hardware store, there are pots and pans and row after row of utensils, all made of metal. Though they are all shapes and sizes, they are all made of the same metal. In this world, there are innumerable things of every kind and variety, but we know they are all reducible to the same elements. The 10,000 things are all this one body of mind. The 10,000 things are everything: trees, pencils, cracks in the sidewalk, pieces of garbage, sun, moon, stars, everything you can name, everything you can think. 10,000 things. When you realize this, for the first time, you become heaven and earth and the universe. This is the experience of Kensho. Everything falls away. There's just this. There are no words for it. As Hakuin said, it's a joy like you've never experienced before. To have come home. To have really come home. To touch base with your own nature and see it as the nature of all things. See it as clearly as a nut you can hold in your hand. And this is the beginning of deepened practice. It's not the end, it's where we then continue on from. The 10,000 things are all this one body of mine. When you realize this for the first time, you become heaven and earth and the universe. You become all things in their infinite number and variety. You bodily realize that all the 10,000 things, just as they are all you, yourself. It is written, I am the same root as all heaven and earth. I am one body with the 10,000 things. Now, Yamada Roshi adds, these are splendid words. It is indeed just as they say, but it won't do if you come to this understanding only through the sutras. That is merely understanding gained from reading the words of the teachings. It is not Kensho, seeing one's nature. It does not mean that you have actually seen the ox. All it means is that you have found the tracks. And it's an excellent point. It means you found the tracks, and that is a wonderful thing. But it's not the end at all. But if you do not distinguish correct from incorrect, how will you recognize true from false? So now you know what the samadhi of mu is. That is still just a trace. This is something we touch base with now and then in the practice of our koan. If it's mu, then it's just mu. Mu. Like Layman Pong's snowball. It fills the eyes, it fills the ears. There's just mu. When there's really nothing but mu, everything steps in. The 10,000 things steps in, an army. This is intimacy. This is what Yamada Roshi is pointing at. This is intimacy. Another name for realization. But you cannot call it Kensho unless, to use the words of Rinzai, you have realized true insight, out of which comes the dynamic for distinguishing Buddha from devil. Well, okay. If you cannot recognize the difference between correct and incorrect, you will not be able to distinguish true from false. If all you can talk about is the samadhi of mu, in which all things are just mu, you haven't yet got the real thing. Everything is still just itself. If you get stuck in oneness, let's say, you're forgetting that each thing is uniquely itself. This ant may look like other ants, but it's like no other ant. This leaf may look like other leaves, but it is unique. There's never been a leaf like this leaf. There's never been anything like just this leaf, or this star, or this pebble, or this person, or this tree. So we can't get lost in generalizing. You cannot say they've really seen the ox until you get that power by which, in the leap of a spark, you separate black from white. In a flash of lightning, you discern stop from start. That is, differences are just as important as oneness. I know in the 60s, there was, a lot of thing about the journey to the one. That was our big deal. But if you get stuck there, you forget about all the amazing differences of life, all the variety of things, all the uniqueness of each thing. It's only halfway there. And so we have to go on. Since you have yet to pass through that gate, only tentatively have you seen the traces. Haven't yet gone all the way through. At this point, we really still cannot say that you're inside. You're still an outsider beyond the gate. For this reason, this provisional stage of seeing the traces has been created. You think you've gradually gotten settled into the samadhi of mu, but you still cannot recognize correct from incorrect, distinguish true from false. You've been saying mu, mu. He's talking especially about monks, and he's kind of pushing them. And they're very young monks that he's addressing here. They just kind of got their credentials, and they're very excited. And he's like kind of giving them some jabs. And doing this over and over, but you haven't the slightest idea if this is the right way or the wrong way. This is still just seeing the traces. And Kakon, who wrote the Oxherding pictures in the 12th century, has written a verse. By the water and under the trees, there are tracks, thick and fast. So Yamada Roshi is saying samadhi, that is where we lose a kind of sense of our self-absorption and our sense of isolation, and really feel oneness, a kind of oneness, and more than empathy, a real intimacy with things. This is not yet insight. It is seeing itself, it is seeing the signs or traces, but it's not yet insight. That is not yet awakening. But it is encouraging. You're on the right track. When you see signs, when you see traces, it means you're on the right track. So it's very encouraging news. In search of the ox, you entered the mountains, and then where you reached the clear waters of a running stream in a thick cedar forest, you came upon the tracks of the ox. Did you not? This is the place of, and he quotes a poem, the willows are steeped with kanons. Kanon is the bodhisattva of compassion. The willows are steeped with kanon's wondrous form. The whispering pines teach the salvation of sentient beings. An old pine speaks intrinsic wisdom, and a mysterious bird toys with truth. Tweet, 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 tweet. Tweet. Mysterious bird toys with truth. Everything steps in. Remember, I've quoted Dogen so many times. To push the self forward to become one with things is called delusion. To allow the 10,000 things to step in and realize themselves through the self is called intimacy. And that's exactly what this poem or realization is pointing at. The willows are steeped with Kanon's wondrous form. The whispering pines teach the salvation of sentient beings. An old pine speaks intrinsic wisdom. Have you ever really stood with a tree or sat with a tree? And this tree is speaking intrinsic wisdom. Of course, there's so much going on now about the actual wisdom of trees. Forests communicate, and old trees protect young trees, and young trees will protect old trees. And there's a tremendous communication going on. But here it is, a Zen poem from maybe 800 years ago. An old pine speaks intrinsic wisdom, and a mysterious bird toys with truth. Blake wrote, does a wise man see the same tree as a fool? No, a fool sees a pile of lumber worth so much money. What does a wise man see when, or she, a wise person, when they look at a tree? The Zen perspective would be, well, even to call it myself is to sully it. Look at the branches. Look at the way the squirrel is sitting there with its tail curled up. Look at the way it sways in the wind. Look at the bark. Can you say what it is? It knows how to live its tree life so perfectly. It gives shelter, it gives food, it gives oxygen. It makes life possible for air-breathing beings. What is a tree? The sound of the wind in the pines, this too is a trace of the ox. Is it not? The call of the nightingale, ho, hokeo, this too is a trace of the ox. Is it not? The streams, the birds, the trees, the forests are all chanting Buddha, chanting Dharma, chanting Sangha. Everything you see, everything you hear, each and every one is a manifestation of the heart mind. There is nothing which is not a trace of the ox. Nothing. An ancient verse runs, the splashing of the brook is the eloquence of the Buddha. Are not the mountains in color the pure Buddha body? This was really Su Tong Po's Enlightenment Verse, great poet of the Tong era. Let's see if I can, I wrote it down. Let's see if I can read it. The sound of the mountain stream is his long, broad tongue. The mountain is his pure body. This, let's see. This evening, 84,000 verses. That is, I understood 84,000 verses in one instant this evening, but how will I tell them tomorrow? That was Su Tong Po's Enlightenment Verse. The splashing of the brook is the long, broad tongue. The mountains that's not the pure Buddha body. When you think about oneness with nature, oh boy, that sums it up, but it's so much more than that. Each thing is distinctly itself. Who's one with what? Who's there to be one with what? In the sweet grass is thick with growth. Did he see it or did he not? The sweet grass is here referred to the sutras, which expound Buddha nature, and the recorded sayings of the ancients, which point to Zen. There are, in fact, enough such books to make a mountain, says Yamada Roshi. We have enough books to make a mountain. Thick with growth here means those grasses are full and plentiful. The grasses still wet with dew are endlessly lush and profuse. in these sweet grasses, in everything. All your thoughts, all your emotions, all your insights, all your doubts, all your issues, in everything you hear, see, there is nothing which does not reveal Buddha nature. Are they not all traces of the ox? And you, have you seen it? Have you heard it? But even in the depths of the deepest mountains, how could it hide from others its snout turned to the sky? Despite the fact that there are so many traces of the ox everywhere, still you haven't seen it. This is a painful reality, isn't it? That we read these things and it really sounds great. If we're honest with ourselves, have we really seen it? So traces are important. They give us an inkling and they rouse something in us that seems so familiar. And yet, have we seen it? That's very painful, to work at it and feel we've not seen it. And yet that's the process. You have to go through winter before you get to spring. That's just how it is. This is because you're stuck in the weeds of self-delusion. Self-delusion really means self-centeredness, and this is the human condition. We're trained to it from childhood, and we have to grow up knowing how to be ourselves. And eventually our mind becomes so preoccupied with the perspective of looking out from me, myself, and I, that the world becomes narrowed down, and then we yearn to find out something beyond that. So even this sense of self-centeredness that we're all burdened with is one of the traces. It's going to help us really become intimate with things if we don't just sit there unconsciously in self-centeredness and think, that's it, that's reality, which is our choice as human beings, whether to do something about it, which doesn't mean get rid of the self or negate the self. It means to see right into and understand the self thoroughly. The thickets of self-delusion are choked with overgrowth. It does not matter how much you seek, how much you search, always you are buried under a mountain of self-centeredness, choked with the weeds of mistaken thinking, which is dualistic. If I'm in here, then you're out there. And now we're living in a dualistic world, which we create with our minds. What if we didn't create that? Is the question he's raising. Then what? Then what? Then maybe all these verses would be our own language, not just traces that rouse something in us. It'd be our own understanding. Choked with the weeds of mistaken thinking, with the weeds of intellectualization. There is no way you can find the ox, but it is not as bad as all that, or sad as all that. How could it hide from others its snout turned to the sky? Says the verse, so long as you've seen the traces of the ox, there is no way the ox can just keep hiding its snout lifted to the sky. Sometime or other, it will show that snout to you. So things are not really so sad after all. Just hearing the verse rouses something in us that is going to bother us till we get to the bottom of it. If you've seen the tracks, then do not throw down your staff in frustration and call it quits. Follow up the tracks until you finally catch it. So long as you do not give up that affirmation of your vow, the vow, Bodhisattva vow comes down to the great vows for all. The many beings are numberless, I vow to free them all. Greed, hatred, and ignorance rise endlessly. I vow to abandon them all. Dharma gates are countless. I vow to wake to them all. Buddha's way is unattainable. I vow to embody it all. This is the vow. So as long as you don't give up on your vow, for certain, you will be able to catch the ox. Don't get discouraged, no matter what. You must summon up the determination to once more push on up that mountain. We are only at seeing the traces, only at the second of the 10 Oxherding pictures. You have been in the, now this is a very monastic thing, so said you've been in the monastery for just 3 months. and only now at the point where you're finally starting to see something like the traces of the ox. There are still among you many who don't know if you're looking at the tracks of an ox or at the tracks of a horse. This is no place to get discouraged and throw down your staff. As we go on in practice, even if you've glimpsed the ox itself, the next Oxherding picture is seeing the ox. Even if you've seen the ox, in the beginning, most people, can say, I think that's an ox. Then maybe years on, you go, oh man, that's really an ox. And then years later, you go, I can see the dried dung on its hoofs. I can see the drool dripping from its muzzle. Man, is that an ox? So things get clearer and clearer as we go on. It's all seeing the ox, but obviously there are degrees, and it comes from continued practice. So the waka is determination deep in the mountains, your efforts bear fruit. Tracks! How gratifying to see a sign. If you can hang on there, we've got one more page, and we'll end a few minutes late, but we'll at least conclude with the traces. So that's it. How gratifying to see a sign. And that's true, isn't it? Just to see a sign when you've been searching for something with your whole heart all your life, to begin seeing traces of it is a great sign. It means you're on the right track. You haven't gone wrong. You've been repeating moo, moo, morning and night since the start of training. As a result, regardless of what you may think, your moo has turned into the tracks of the ox. Up till now, you've been repeating moo, as if it had no connection with you. But now you're starting to see that this moo is your own moo. It has turned into the traces of the ox, your own heart mind. Somehow, it has settled into you. Remember, and then he quotes, if you persevere day and night without a break, then just one lighting of the candle of the Dharma is at once to attain it. That is from Wu Men's commentary on the first koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature or not? One candle, one spark lights your Dharma candle. There it is, right there. Roshi Kapleau used to say, even lighting one tiny match in a dark room changes the quality of that darkness. Be that one little match. One little insight changes the quality of our own darkness. Doesn't matter how small it is. It's the beginning of something transformative. Do not let those tracks out of sight wherever you go. Ponder them when you're out on, they do begging rounds or takahatsu, where the monks go out with the monk hats, and they march along in kinhin down the streets of the city, exclaiming ho, which means Dharma, and then they'll stop at businesses and houses with an offering bowl, and people come out and make offerings, and they live on essentially on the donations of others. The Dharma teaching is an offering. So he says, when you're out on begging rounds, you're not doing work. In other words, keep up your practice. Aiken Roshi used to say, during the day, we're lay people, we're involved in all kinds of things. Take a minute and just count your breath for a second. Nobody will know. You're sitting in the waiting room at the dentist or whatever. Just silently count 1, 2. Let everything else go and be present for just a minute. Or take up mu. Just breathe it, be it fully, whatever your koan is now. We're lay people, we're not monks, but we can work this into our busy lives. Take 4 or 5 moments in each day and just do that. Just be present fully. Let everything else go. Well, this is one breath mu. This is what Aiken Roshi used to recommend. Hakuin said, whatever you're doing, dig into it, dig into it. That was the piece from Hakuin that I read, a letter to a layman. Dig into it. Standing, lying down, eating, getting ready to take a nap, showering, cooking. What is it? What is it? What is Mo? What is this? Or just one, two, just be present with what you're doing. Be present. If you persevere without break through the day, through the night, then finally, and this is very Sesshin. Remember, you're in Sesshin. This is very much Sesshin directions or recommendations, encouragement. Persevere without break through the day, through the night. You will finally catch one brood of an ox. Search to the very limits of your uncertain heart. There, the tracks of the long lost ox. Search to the very limits of your uncertain heart. There, the tracks of the long lost ox. Well, you seem to have found the ox's tracks, but now no matter what you do, no matter how far you go, all you find are traces. There's no sign even of the ox's tail. You haven't spotted even the ox's tail, let alone the snout pointed up at the sky. You say to yourself, no matter how many times I go to Doksan, I just get wrung out by the bell. I give up. Even if this is what you're thinking, there's no way out of it because you get dragged out in a monastery. I guess in a Rinzai monastery, this, Aiken Roshi saw it as a big farce doing this. He said it's just part of the ritual. But he goes, they get dragged out by the head monk, even if you don't want to go, and you get pushed into Doksan. You have to do it because you're a monk. And they make you do it. And you go moo, and they go out, and then you get wrung out, and they do it again. Aiken Roshi said, no, be genuine. We're lay people. Be genuine, be real. It's your own aspiration. It's your own life. How do you grow? How do you mature? These are your own questions. Anyway, he's dealing with monks here. So you didn't think it would come to this. How many years is it going to take going moo at this pace? You're completely disgusted. That's what you may be thinking. But on the other side, he's talking now about being the teacher, to listen to all this moo from every one of you, one after the other, with never a change. In the end, he gets disgusted too. This is an endurance contest, a test of patience. Who's going to give in first? There's nothing to do but play the fool. And just as always, go out and search for the tracks of your lost ox. Now, with that attitude, go get the ox. Or think of little Bo Peep. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. What's the next line?
Leave them alone and they'll come home.
Right, leave them alone and they'll come home, wagging their tails behind them. How do you leave everything alone? Just sit quietly like a mountain, like a pine tree, with that pine tree's wisdom. Completely alone, completely with everything. Let everything alone. Let it all be. Let it all settle like muddy water until it settles down and becomes absolutely clear. You'll find your ox. It'll come home on its own. We'll stop here and recite our great vows for all.